Hello and welcome to the final installment of our 2017 Virtual Summit Series representing the very best workshops from the 2016 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. Our topic today is Who is Your Inclusive ERG Excluding? My name is Daniel Lawrence Smith, Director of Education Strategy here at Out and Equal. This is a broadcast audio call and it will be 75 minutes in length. Be sure to turn up the speakers or headsets on your computer. And we're going to ask for your active participation during the call, so we will have some polls as well as chat functions. And also, please let us know if you have any questions, and we'll be sure to include those in our Q&A at the end of the call. This call will be recorded and available as a digital archive after the session. A few announcements here at Out and Equal. Coming up on March 21st will be our Building Bridges to LGBT Cultural Competency 101. This will be a 1-hour fee-for-service webinar from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific. You can register online at outandequal.org on-site training. Coming up March 27th through 29th will be our Executive Forum held here in San Francisco at the Westin St. Francis. That will then culminate on March 29th with Momentum, Out and Equal's annual leadership celebration and gala. March 30th will be our monthly town call on self-ID. Coming up April 3rd, 10th, and 17th will be Building Bridges 201, which will be a 3-part, 1-hour fee-for-service webinar. April 27th will be our monthly town call on gender expression. And of course, October 9th through 12th will be the 2017 Out and Equal Workplace Summit in Philadelphia. Before we begin, we'd like to get a pulse of who's joining us today. So we're going to begin with a poll. Our first question is, what is your role within your company? And feel free to check all that apply. So we're getting these results in real time. So we see quite a few ERG, BRG members, some LGBT and ally employees. If there's something else, please feel free to go ahead and chat that in. Great, a lot of HR and D&I folks. Great, thank you all so much. And let's go ahead and move on to the next session. What is your business sector? Again, feel free to check any and all that apply. Great. So we're seeing a lot of banking, insurance, a lot of financial folks, some nonprofit folks. Thank you. Aerospace and defense. Great. So we have a fantastic diversity of folks. And just so you know, there's about 250 folks on the call so far, so thank you all for dialing in. Oil and gas, thank you. Okay. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our fantastic panelists, Max Wang and Heath Clayton. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and welcome everybody. My name is Max Wang. I am a senior consultant from Deloitte Advisory, and with me today is our one and only Heath Clayton.
Thanks,
Heath,
Max.
would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name is Heath Clayton. I've been at Deloitte about 6 years. I sit in the talent development organization of Deloitte, and my day job is running programs helping transitioning military veterans find careers after they leave the military. And I'm thrilled to be speaking with you all today from sunny Los Angeles.
Thank you, Heath. And I'll introduce myself in a little bit. First of all, I would like to thank everybody who dialed in. We have so many people I cannot even imagine it. And I want to give a very special thank you to those who joined us back in October in Orlando. That was my first webinar, so it meant a lot to me, and your support made our workshop a very interactive and a great one. And I know that I do not have a lovely voice, and you cannot even see me today. So for those of you who dialed in, who joined us twice, I'm pretty sure you really care about this topic, and we will not let you down today. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, welcome and thank you very much. Just as a reminder, this is kind of a shorter version of what we have in Orlando, and we kind of wanted to make this webinar a very interactive one. And it will be, through the chat feature that you all see on your lower left side of your screen. There unfortunately will not be a dial-in for this one, but me and the moderator will remind you when you should start typing in things to interact with us.
Yeah, and I'll just start off, Max, I'll just start off by saying that this workshop is really about being authentic and sharing and experiencing others' stories and hearing from other people. So in good humor, I'm just going to say, do as we say and not as we do. And please do send as many responses through the chat feature, and we'll try to read them and incorporate your stories into our message today as much as we can.
Thank you, Heath. So just to give everybody a little bit overview of what we're trying to accomplish here. Through this webinar, we're first going to take a look, beyond the LGBT and uncover a diverse demographic within our community. Basically, why we're doing this. I mean, the 243 of you dialed in for a reason. We don't not just have an hour sitting there to throw around. So we really want to dig deeper why we care about this cause. And then we will highlight the potential exclusion pitfalls and scenarios. Basically, what is happening in our BRGs that led us to this webinar. And we will challenge you to examine yourself and your ERG, who you are as an individual and as a BRG group. We will also discuss frameworks for creating a more inclusive environment, beginning with our personal empathy. So Heath will give you his insight on this topic. And to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Max Wang. I am originally from China. I came to the U.S. in 2011 for grad school at Boston College. After that, I stayed in Boston, which is a city that I really love. It's very liberal, it's very American, and above all, it is very diverse. And I'm very lucky to work for a firm that is also extremely diverse. We have the first female CEO of all Big Fours. We have a very diverse group of, speaking of age, ethnicity, of everything. We are a very diverse group, and we embrace different work styles. One thing that people kind of stereotype auditors is like, oh, we are like boring people, and we are very, introvert. And we're not. Like, nobody wants to be labeled an auditor just because they're auditors. And as LGBTs, it works the same way. We do not want to be labeled hashtag capital GAY just because we are LGBT. To me, I identify myself in several different ways, right? And above all, I'm a human being, and I also think I am a very big geek. Not nerdy enough to be a nerd, but geek, just to sound more fashionable. At this point, after 6 years in America, I pretty much consider myself a New Englander. But in the meantime, I'm very proud of my roots, and I'm proud to say that I am Chinese, and I'm proud of it. And we would like to do a little bit interaction with you. How do you think your personal identifier is? What is your primary personal identifier? So to interact with us, you can just in the chat section, type in your primary personal identifier and send it to us. And while you are doing that, Heath, why don't you share a little bit about your personal identifiers?
Sure, yeah. I think I have a very hard time choosing one default personal identifier. I grew up homeschooled on a farm. I'm also Chickasaw Indian and come from a strong culture of being close to my tribe, and my grandmother grew up on a land plot that was assigned to her by the government, and I'm very culturally Chickasaw, but I look very white, but that's still a part of me. Another, I think, outlier for me, especially at Deloitte and in professional services, is that I never went to college. And I never work with people in professional services that didn't have the college experience. So I think that in some ways paints me as a non-identifier sometimes as well. Other identifiers that I use are Christian, traveler, Trekkie, Star Trek geek. I mean, given on the audience or who I'm meeting with or any given day, my personal identifier changes. And so I think that's just getting to what you said, Max. There's so many different ways to look at people. What are some of the responses coming in from the audience?
Yeah, and
so
Keith and Max, thank you both so much for sharing that. I mean, I think it's important to note, even to Max's point, that we all have so many different identifiers, but no one of us want to be defined by any one of them, right? It's all a combination of what we bring into the workforce and through our lives every day. And I'll read out just some of the ones that have come through, and thank you all for your participation. I'm seeing mom, queer, writer, a woman, a Harry Potter lover, female, Black,
leader,
archaeologist,
Democrat, nerd wife.
Very interesting. Yeah, it is a very similar result from what we got from our live session. From our live session, we saw atheist, we saw transgender, we had geek, we had engineer. I'm looking at it right now. We have Trekkie, which I noticed we have another Trekkie here on this call too. Introvert, hashtag flawless. We're all flawless, guys. So as you can see, we are all different. We have different identifiers beyond our LGBT identifier to ourselves. And if we take a look at how we see our BRGs, we see our BRGs based on our ethnicity, based on our gender, based on our sexual orientation, and we have talked about intersectionality between these BRGs or ERGs, but there are differences between us that, there's just no way for us to create a BRG for every single one of us. Imagine, creating a Star Trek fans group within our professional firm. That could be a little bit overkill. But we do have to admit that there are very different personalities and there are very different characteristics to us. We have Republicans, we have Christians, we have parents, and we have, after all, our allies. And based on my personal experience, talking to people, there are few people of us, if not more than that just couldn't help feeling excluded from time to time within our BRGs. Thinking about how we all share different, we all share common identifiers, but still on our own personality identifiers, it is kind of doesn't really agree with the mission or the initial thought why we built our BRGs. As an expat, having witnessed the past election, one of the takeaways for me personally is we really need to listen to each other and communicate with each other with a very open mind. And it shouldn't really, for our BRGs, it shouldn't really matter, where you're from, what your political view is, how old you are. If you think, whether you think Lady Gaga or Beyonce is better, or if you hate both and love Tim McGraw, it shouldn't matter. Individuals who share one identity may have vastly different interests because of their other divergent identifiers. So at this workshop, we're really hoping to talk, under the big LGBTQ umbrella, talk about the differences between ourselves. One of the feedbacks and one of the points we kind of discussed with the live audience back in October is when you look at your BRGs, a majority of us would agree that it is very white, very young, very gay, and based on my observation in the past few months, it is also very liberal. For us,
I'd throw one more out there. I'd throw one more out there too, Max.
Yeah.
Yeah. One more thing, Max, I think that became apparent really in the live session was overall, as a generalization, and when we did a poll of hands in the room, right, they are very white, they are very young, they are very gay. But one thing that kind of came out was there was a lot of auditors and not that many janitors, right? And I think that's definitely in some of our ERGs, particularly in professional services, are you including the administrative assistants? Are you including the mailroom staff? Are you including everyone in your company? Or is the ERG only open to those that are in certain tiers of the company or certain professions? And that was something else that had come out of the live session.
Exactly. We will talk about our experience, when we feel, to share a little bit of stories when we feel excluded from a BRG in a little bit. And we would all agree that it is our common goal to make our BRG and ERGs a safe, accepting, and welcoming one. And I'm sure for all of you, or most of you who dialed in, you have some story to share when you once at one time or very often felt excluded from your BRGs. So let's start with let's start with a poll. I don't think these are the don't think these are the polls that we have.
I'm going to shadow in. These are actually not the polls that were supposed to be there. But our first question was, and go ahead and feel free to chat this into the box. Have you ever felt excluded from an ERG within your company? Has there ever been a reason why you felt excluded from being part of an ERG? And right away, people were typing in yes, 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 yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's if people don't mind,
yes
let's
as
just
a woman,
take
yes as a lesbian.
Yeah, let's take 20 seconds, and can someone just type up just a 2 or 3 sentence example? I was excluded because of this, and because this event made me feel this way or this. I would love to hear just a few short stories. Maybe if we could take 20 seconds for people to type them in.
Yeah, and while you do that, let me share my story and why I wanted to, start this workshop and present it at the ONE. So as an expat, when I first came to the U.S., I was pretty much very, didn't know much about the LGBT community, especially the one here in America. I didn't know what RuPaul is. I have never been to P-Town. I had no idea what a white party is. So for me to be at a social event with other professionals from other BRGs, I very often felt very uncomfortable just being there. And on top of that, I am also Asian. We have a lot of foreigners here in the U.S., but within the LGBT community, people do not see Asians the same way, say, they see Australians. And for all the Asian gay guys out there, you probably know what I'm talking about. People don't come to us, you're like, oh, hey, do you serve? That sounds so awesome. People very often people look at us and think, okay, maybe he doesn't know, the topics that I'm going to talk to him about, so I'm not going to approach that person. So that is my personal experience. Is sometimes I feel excluded from professional LGBT events, and ironically, I very often felt even more welcome at straight social events where I felt people were actually interested in my story, in my background. So that is why it brought to my attention that, maybe I'm not the only person who felt more or less excluded from time to time from LGBT, the BRGs or the social events. And I'm sure there are similar stories out there, or even crazier ones. So let's see what people shared in the chat platform here.
Great. And Max, I'll ask Isabel Porras, our Associate Director of Research, who's going to read out just some of the comments that people have chatted in.
Yeah, lots of great themes in here. So some folks are saying, they feel left out because they're bisexual, and so they're sort of shunned aside because they're bisexual or queer identified or poly. Others are saying that as entry-level employees, they weren't offered the opportunity to attend certain meetings, or others said it was as you mentioned earlier, he's tied to specific pay scale. Another theme that I see is allies felt uncomfortable. They weren't clear whether they were invited or not. And one person mentions that they felt like there wasn't a need to develop straight white males as allies, and so they felt sort of uncomfortable and unwelcome in the spaces as well. Women have also been chatting in to mention opportunities or moments, when they were brainstorming or otherwise engaging with the ERGs and were pushed aside as the only women in that space. So lots of themes coming in.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys very much. And I did notice that when we asked the former question, do you feel excluded? Have you ever felt excluded from your BRGs? I did notice some people answered, very fortunately, they have never felt excluded from their BRGs. So for those people out there, could you please share a little bit your experience, what you think your BRG or ERG did well that you never felt excluded from it? Take your time. It will give you some time to type in your answer.
And I'm seeing one comment here, and this is actually a common thread, is for individuals who don't work out of the corporate headquarters, if they're working remote, that they have trouble dialing into their ERG and feeling included in that respect as well, so also based on location.
Yeah, and just something that happened to me. Yeah, this might be a similar thread too, is that I was in a smaller office of Deloitte and joining our LGBT ERG, and I never really felt excluded until I started going to some of the large meetings and some of the large volunteer efforts, or things like Out and Equal, right? When you get in large numbers and you start to really realize all the dynamics that are at play and become more involved in the ERG. So I think sometimes I began to feel more excluded just the more I knew, right, and the more I knew to look for. And we'll get to that here at the end of once we turn to solutions as well, towards the end of the webinar.
Isabel, any answers you think you want to share with us?
Sorry, I was locked in there. Yes, tons of, sorry, I'm trying to read them as quickly as they come in. So some folks are saying being invited to speak to their specific experiences certainly helps them add in. Leading chapters themselves obviously helps them kind of create more inclusive environments. But I see folks are still chatting in primarily, their opportunities with their options of being excluded. So lots of folks still chatting in with that information. But I think those who are in leadership positions are chatting in to say, that they're taking more proactive measures to ensure that they don't exclude some groups like bisexual individuals, asexual, poly, and so forth.
And I think we're seeing a lot of folks who identify as being an ally, feeling that they're not, being ingrained in the LGBT ERG. So it's so important that we include our allies with us because we're stronger together.
That came up during the live session too. And from my personal experience, I also saw that. We have a very steady a consistent group of LGBT members, but for our allies, we see them often come and go. And I always wondered what we did or what we didn't do to really keep them around. I mean, obviously they care about the causes, but maybe there is just a lack of adherence that didn't help them to make the decision to stay for a long term. So we will move forward, and during our upcoming discussions, we'll talk about how people could feel excluded during their ERG activities and day-to-day events. So we would like to examine two scenarios with you, and we want to hear from you how you see these scenarios might make people feel like they are being excluded from their BRGs. So the first scenario is for activity planning. When planning activities for the year, the ERG Planning Committee proposed the following 3 suggestions: a skiing weekend, an after-work social, and a political campaign fundraiser. How do you see these events could make people feel excluded? And what are your suggestions to fix those problems? If you could, please share your thoughts with us in the chat section, and we will share a few of them with you.
It was funny when we were designing these slides back in October. I think I created this one, and these are all activities I had seen in ERGs. So these were I had many examples to pull from, and so I just thought this would be an interesting mix of potential events to discuss.
Yep. Interestingly enough, we actually in Boston, Deloitte, we haven't really organized a skiing weekend yet. So maybe that is something we can do in the future.
And the chat functions are going absolutely through the roof. So some of the comments are with regard to ski weekend if someone is differently abled, so not able to participate in an athletic activity. Some comments around after-work social, if somebody might be underage or perhaps they are not somebody who drinks alcohol. And then with the political campaign fundraiser, based on different backgrounds and political beliefs, that might also be polarizing for some individuals.
And I would add that folks are also mentioning class issues as well. Like ski weekend may be a little bit unaffordable for others. They may not know. They may not have had the resources to ski beforehand. So there's a little bit of a class coding there as well.
Definitely.
Some mentions of family status, so some individuals maybe won't be able to participate in an after-work social hour if they need to go home and take care of some family responsibilities or things like a ski weekend, things of that nature.
Thank you very much. Yeah, with 270 people, we definitely covered all the answers we had at the live session, and we even had more answers. And I saw somebody saying, there is simply not one activity that could meet the expectation of everybody, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, there with every activity there will be people who feel excluded, but overall, we see our ERG activities or ERGs as a portfolio, right? It is how we try to be far-reaching as possible, and how we try to make as many people feel included as possible. So there's a lot of takeaways from here. And for a skiing weekend, people with disability might just simply not be able to join us. And after work social, I personally don't drink much either, and I don't know even how to order a lot of cocktails. So that might be a little bit like a no-no to me. And political campaign fundraiser, it's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of people, but it's a lot based on your political views. And just inviting people to join a campaign fundraiser does not mean that they 100% of the time agree with the cause or agree with the good being behind the fundraiser. So these are all these elements we need to take into consideration, and we need to consider with empathy how we should organize our social events like this. Heath will touch a little bit on that topic in a little bit, and I also have him lead you guys taking a look at this the second scenario.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at one more scenario that kind of tees up a conversation of what could be wrong with this scenario. And then we're going to spend the rest of the call on solutions, which I know we're all eager probably to talk about. Scenario number 2, when electing ERG officers for the upcoming year, the outgoing ERG president collects officer nominations from current officers, maybe their friends or people they have in their network, a nominations box at an after-work social event, or the outgoing president just picks from his own network and not even the network of the current officers. Are these sound succession planning measures? Could you see potential problems? So I'm sure that the text box is going to blow up here, but what could be wrong with this? What do people think?
And the chat function is, once again, lighting up, talking about just making inroads with the existing ERG so that it's not inclusive. You're not opening it up to more diverse groups. Too narrow of a focus, only looking within your in-groups, not wide enough of a pool. Identifying possible successors, making sure that there's transparent means to do that.
All good stuff, yeah. I think some themes that came out in the live conversation back in October was how do we get allies to be in leadership, right? How do we get people from all different income levels, from all different backgrounds to be in our ERG leadership? How do we get them to want to volunteer and to continue to stay involved? And we heard a lot of good examples from other companies with leading practices. One that stuck out to me was some people just proactively reach out to allies to meet certain requirements. Like there will be one ally on the board of our ERG, or there will be one person from this business unit that's underrepresented. At Deloitte, for instance, we're 4 businesses, tax, audit, consulting, and advisory, all basically 4 separate businesses not really working together most of the time. So that's been a big push for us. How do we include everyone at Deloitte from all levels and all businesses? And sometimes they just kind of baked in requirements into their ERG charter, whereas some people prefer to make it, the selection more informal. It's really going to depend on your company, but the North Star goal needs to be, of course, having a diverse group of leaders and leaders that reflect the LGBT and ally population in your company. Any other chat responses that stood out to you all?
A great comment here from Tara, who shared that she was selected as her ERG chair by surprise. And she didn't think that a conservative major pharma was ready for a trans ERG leader, but they nominated her for it. So some great feedback with that.
Oh yeah, what a great story.
Others are mentioning that this should be a more proactive plan rather than just kind of just using these 3 opportunities, but that a solid ERG should be working through this throughout the year as well. And great. I noticed that some folks are chatting in, for example, like we haven't discussed how our leadership team identifies, and so that would also play into having representations of allies and non-lesbian or gay folks in leadership positions as well.
Great. Awesome. I'm sure we could continue to look at this scenario for another half hour and talk about best practices. Let's go ahead and move on to the next activity slide. And this is just going to be an open chat. And I primarily want people to focus on bullet number 2. We've kind of already talked about some of the mistakes. But did anyone do anything about it in your ERG? What was your solution to maybe some of the problems that were brought to the surface by these 2 scenarios we looked at? I'm really curious to hear about people's personal stories of standing up, or ERGs that did things the right way. And so we'll give people a few seconds for those responses to come in. Max, do you recall specifically a moving story that came out of the live session when people were talking about solutions? I think there were quite a few ERGs that had come up with some creative solutions for the income level gaps and the kind of the status gaps, and focusing more on making ERG activities more altruistic, like volunteer activities or marching in fundraisers for someone's cancer drive, that sort of thing, and really kind of making them income agnostic, making them about helping other people, making them about acknowledging the needs of others. And I think that kind of got universal agreement as something that should be baked into just about any ERG, is having a bit of a selfless component. And I think we heard some really good stories from some pretty senior executives that were there in Orlando sharing how they were straight allies and how insights they had from being included in the ERG leadership, and how efforts to make them feel welcome and included really paid dividends, and making the community more visible at the company, and bonding with your fellow coworkers and that sort of thing.
And I remember somebody at the live session shared, it came from somebody who is an ally and who seldom felt excluded from his BRG. And he said what they did pretty well is, just start with the little things. Wear a sticker around the office, give out some free flags that they can display on their desk just for our straight allies to show their support for the LGBTQ community. And that is a great way just to, slowly build our BRG and let people get to know our community and contribute in their own way.
Yeah. Particularly from those allies, putting stickers on their desk or a flag on their desk. We heard a couple of stories, that really was moving to a lot of people and was very symbolic.
And we're getting some great feedback here in the chat box. A few folks actually mentioning what it's like to be an introvert, and that there can be strong personality types in some ERG meetings, so feeling that they're not being heard if they're not necessarily the person who's going to stand on the soapbox. Some other folks, again, mentioning that it's challenging, again, to be an ally. Some folks mentioning that if they're bisexual and if they choose to be part of their ERG while they're in opposite-sex relationship, that they're then viewed differently with that role and that involvement. Isabel, you want to pick up some here too?
Yeah, I think you brought up the introvert one, which I thought was great, because some folks are saying, what I did in response is things like planning and hosting the annual party, and the introverts are saying, for those of us who don't feel comfortable speaking up or hosting events, we work sort of behind the scenes. So I'm noticing here one person said, this is the Politico, I'll start campaigning behind the scenes for something I feel strongly about, and that way gather support and then bring the idea back to the group. Another person also, person who identified as introverted also said they'll volunteer, for smaller tasks or different tasks that don't require public speaking, and that's their way of being engaged and included in the ERG as well.
Another person brings up a good point about the role that we each play as allies. So, that the L, the G, the B, and the T should each be allies for each other, to not only make in-groups with your own identity, but making sure that we're really sending that broader message that we're all supporting each other.
Awesome stories.
One more that I just want to add, someone who's an ally and is also remote. So they've employed a desk magnet that they created their own copy of the desk magnet since they can't see the one in the company, and added it to their shared picture. So that way they're sort of a visible ally in that way.
That's great. Let's take one more story, and then we'll move on to solutions.
Another story here, I was excluded from a leadership role involved with a women's ERG. Another similar group then adopted me and listened to my ideas, and eventually sponsored one of the major ideas, which was to bring a former summit speaker, Vivian Ming, to their workplace for a major keynote talk. So this person found alliances with other ERGs in their organization.
Great. That's a great best practice too. Awesome. All right. Well, I want to we're about halfway through. I want to shift the conversation. We've talked for the last 41 minutes about the problem, right? And we've sort of established that some people do feel excluded in their ERG, and that it's a tough balance to plan ERG events and to organize an ERG in a way that makes everyone in your organization feel included. Well, we could talk about the challenges and the problems for another hour, but when designing this workshop, we really wanted to be proactive. We really wanted to be helpful. How do we look at solutions to these problems? And Deloitte definitely doesn't have all the answers, but we pulled some themes from Deloitte initiatives and some stuff from our Deloitte learning curriculum to really give people some tangible examples, some take-home next steps and frameworks for making their home ERGs more inclusive. And the first thing, outside of any of our other recommendations, is focusing on personal empathy. And you can advance the slide if you would. How many of the problems that we just heard about and the challenges we just heard about could have been avoided had a member of the ERG, particularly a member of the ERG in leadership, been really empathetic in their conversations? When you have an ERG member that comes to you with a problem, or you're meeting them for the first time at an event, are you really listening to them? Are you really trying to be inclusive? Or are you catching up with your friends, catching up with the people that will be beneficial to your career? What is your motivation? And I've found personally that if you really try to make an effort to understand people and to put yourself in their shoes, it goes a long way to smoothing out a lot of the conflict and challenges when it comes to inclusion. And it's easy to say, be more empathetic, right? Like, what does that mean? Well, we have a framework for it. So if you go to the next slide, here at Deloitte, we've put together a list of the most common empathy mistakes. Quick fixing is the first one. It's being in a solve first, ask later mode, jumping ahead to solutions without taking the time to really unpack and understand the issue. Now, this is what I am guilty of. If my most common empathy mistake is definitely quick fixing. I know the solution to anyone's problem even before I've heard the problem. I have the answer for them. And that's something I really had to work on. Another empathy mistake that everyone makes at some point in their life is steamrolling. A person gets on a roll and won't stop. Their audience can't get a word in edgewise. And if you think that none of these apply to you, look at the second half of that slide down there. You could be in danger if you find yourself in this situation. And those, could be in danger if explanations really hit home for me. Another common empathy mistake that people make is box checking, expressing empathy in a perfunctory way that comes across as superficial or insincere. If anyone's ever used the phrase, I hear you, or I know how you feel, do you really know how they feel? Are you just advancing the conversation, trying to change the subject? Or are you really listening to how they feel and trying to understand, trying to put yourself in their shoes? Another one that happens a lot is cherry picking. They might give you a laundry list of things that are going well, a few things that are going bad. Are you only going to listen to the stuff that's going well, right? Are you only listening for what you want to hear? And the final empathy mistake we're going to highlight is misreading, misinterpreting the clues and arriving at a conclusion that's just plain wrong. You could be in danger if you're making assumptions but not explicitly testing them. I think as consultants, we are trained to try to not do this, right? Like to not just hear the client's problems, but then to summarize the problem back to them, right? If I understand you right, this is what you're saying, to kind of rephrase it back. That's always a great practice because, if you're not paying attention, you could have just completely misread the situation. So the first step to changing your behavior when it comes to empathy, in my mind, is really acknowledging that you make those mistakes. And for me, it was picking the most common one. And I already said it earlier that it was quick fixing. So I try to now structure my conference calls or whenever I'm in an ERG event to really listen to the challenges and the problems first and then propose solutions afterwards, maybe at the end of the meeting or at the end of the call, or even follow up in an email later and really stew on it to make sure that I'm not walking in solution first, problem later. So for the next few minutes, I would love for people just to kind of ponder this type in the chat box what your most common empathy mistake is, and then maybe a funny story about how this impacted you as it relates to ERG. Max, do you have any funny stories when it comes to empathy mistakes, or do you recall any funny stories from the live session in October?
I mean, within the LGBT community, not really, but I think a lot of the questions we get answered is, after I introduce myself as a Chinese expat, people might say, oh, I love Chinese food, or what's your real name? I think those are questions that people really are trying to, I really appreciate people trying to make a connection and trying to make a conversation with me, but sometimes it just doesn't come off their intended way. I think mistakes or very unconscious mistakes like this happen every day with many people. I make those mistakes myself too. I think overall, if we can just be more considerate and show more sincere empathy for each other, I think the situation will definitely be a lot improved for all of us.
Yeah, agreed. So I know this wasn't a poll question, but looking at the chat box, what do you think people's most common empathy mistake was? What's coming out as a winner?
We're getting some great feedback here. Some folks mentioning steamrolling, getting nervous when they begin to speak, so they just ramble on. Another individual saying that he's a quick fixer, and he has a tendency to only listen for details that he might have an immediate fix for. Another person chiming in as an optimist, so only seeing things through rose-colored glasses.
I think there's also someone in there saying being a well-meaning ally. I think this might be to the Chinese food point you were making, Max, who completely steps on correct terminology or sometimes says the wrong thing. I'm so grateful that people have acknowledged my good intentions and corrected me in an educational way. So they're recognizing the empathy mistake might be, just sort of talking without thinking, but then folks are correcting that, and I'm sure that that's something that happens frequently with folks.
Yeah. Oh, there's one story that really stuck out with me from our live session in October. We were on this topic and about stepping on inappropriate terms and phrases and not being well-meaning but coming across wrong. And it was this very senior executive, and she stood up and she said, I'm an ally. I'm a straight woman. I'm an ally, and I've been trying to become more involved and be supportive. And she says, I constantly feel like I'm making faux pas. And she's like, I feel like my heart's in the right place, but and she shared just from her generation, her experience, that the word queer was a word that made her very uncomfortable, just given where she grew up and when she grew up and that sort of thing. And she said, I'm trying, and what came out of that was a really positive conversation on if you are truly being empathetic, if you're truly just there with the right intentions and ask questions in a genuine way, that is how you get to those good conversations, right? And that's how we can help our allies learn. It's by both the allies showing up and not making empathy mistakes, but then the other members of the ERG community showing up and not making empathy mistakes. And starting off.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that.
Support.
It's important for us to recognize how quickly language shifts, and the example of queer, I think, is a great example. Terms shift very quickly, even within a couple of years. Like, I've always identified as Latina, for example, and in the last 48 to 72 months, in a really recent time, folks have been changing terminology and using terms like Latinx, for example, and you feel and sometimes you might speak differently or use a different terminology, and so I think it's important for all of us to have a little patience with each other, and that's what I see folks chatting in as well. That sometimes our first instinct is to make fun of somebody or to correct the error immediately, but we need to be more understanding of each other and just a little bit more patient.
And I think that's spot on, Isabel, because what we know is, there's 250 of us dialed into this call today, spending this time together with good intent. And people want to do and say the right things, but sometimes for lack of knowing what that is, will hold back and not say anything. So as an ally, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to have all the right answers. But it's acknowledging that and it's moving on from there, and again, with that place of good intent.
Yeah, yeah. It all goes back to personal empathy. That's rule number one. Let's go ahead and advance to 2 more slides forward, or 1 more slide forward, I guess. Here are some other frameworks that can help make your ERG more inclusive. At Deloitte, the 3 pillars of our inclusion strategy are leveraging unique strengths, fostering well-being, and encouraging authenticity. And we're going to dive into this one by one and kind of relate this to making ERGs more inclusive. But it really goes down to helping people feel like they belong, that inclusion is core to who your company is as a company, that they're valued for their strengths, that they have the freedom to live and work openly, and have the flexibility to be, to nurture their bodies, minds, and purpose and be a productive member of the community. Let's look at the first one. Go ahead and advance the slide. If we talk about encouraging authenticity, I think this is the most important of the 3 frameworks when it comes to structuring and running your ERG. At Deloitte, our national leader of our ERG is a tax director, very senior, has a great career. And a few years ago, he came out as bisexual and really wanted to give back, really wanted to help, and became the national sponsor for the ERG. And very early on in the conversation, going around and meeting all of our chapters and the hundreds of members that we have in our LGBT ERG, he was very authentic from day one. He said, I am sometimes uncomfortable talking about my sexuality. It's something that I'm working on. I feel a lot of judgment sometimes for being a bisexual who frequently dates women in our community. But I am here and I am going to be my authentic self. I'm going to share my challenges with you all, and I'm going to be here to support you at Deloitte. And setting that tone from the beginning of, oh wow, like this is our leader. He is being himself. He's being honest. He's being vulnerable. He's sharing his challenges. It really sets the right tone for a lot of our ERG leadership. And I like to say that authentic leadership is contagious. And I'll get back to that at the end with a personal story of mine. But by encouraging your executives to be authentic, particularly your ERG leadership to be authentic, it's going to trickle down to the members of your ERG where they feel like they can be more authentic, that they can really not feel like they have to put on a charade. They don't have to pretend that they're gay. They can actually admit that they're bi. And a whole slew of other examples that I know everyone could probably share of not feeling like they can show up authentically to some of their ERG events. For me, it was, like I said earlier, not having to admit that I didn't go to college, right, and that I came from a very different background from a lot of the members in the ERG, and didn't want to do, alumni recruiting at Ivy Leagues, right? And having some of those conversations and just being boldly be able to say, hey, I didn't go to college, but, can I get involved in some other ERG activities? But authenticity is really key. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, and then maybe we can circle back for questions. The second kind of framework for making ERGs more inclusive is leveraging unique strengths. Now, bear with me for a moment, but at Deloitte, we think of strengths as something that makes you excited, something that really jazzes you. It's not necessarily something that you're good at. I like to explain to people this way. If you open your email in the morning, your strengths are the emails that you send off immediately, that you enjoy doing. You dig through your inbox and it's like, oh yes, they mailed a message back. And you quickly finish the task and send it back to them, right? Something that is not a strength is the emails that sit there till the end of the day or perhaps the end of the week, and they're the last emails that you push out of your inbox. That's not a strength. That's something that drains you. And at Deloitte, we really try to talk about when you're building a team, when you're assigning tasks, assigning them according to what excites people and what strengthens them. In teams that I managed at Deloitte, I remember that there was this one member of my team, and he was just awesome at Excel. He could make Excel dance and sing, right? And so I made him in charge of enrollment for our group, right, and collecting the information and submitting all the forms and creating all the templates and managing the database, because I just knew that he was a whiz on it, according to his other projects. And so when helping out with the ERG or with some other events, that's what he should be doing. And I made other members of my team do other tasks, like comms or speaking. And he told me after a few months, it just came in conversation, that he absolutely hated Excel. He's like, yes, I'm good at it, but I absolutely hate it. And that was eye-opening to me, right? How am I supposed to expect members of my team or leadership in an ERG or my ERG members to want to stay engaged, to want to stay involved, if you're not aligning them to projects and tasks on the ERG that align to their strengths? And not everyone, of course, can do the fun and sexy parts all the time. But I guarantee you that if you polled your ERG groups and you really asked them to just openly share what they want to do, you're going to have someone on that team that loves Excel. You're going to have someone there that loves public speaking, right? You're going to have someone that wants to keep a track of the finances and wants to organize the events. Why not just set the kind of titles aside, the leadership aside, the egos aside, and really leverage your ERG members to do activities that fulfill them? The third framework that we're going to talk to, and if you move to the last slide, is fostering well-being. And this can come across in a lot of different ways. I'll tell a couple of stories, and Max, maybe you can chime in with some stories that you remember from our workshop as well. But I was organizing an event one time, and it was a big event. It had a few hundred people coming, and it had a lot of volunteers, not unlike some of these large ERG events. And they would always go well, and there was this one volunteer who always showed up early, always did the best job, always got great reviews, always gave awesome feedback. And I didn't think anything was wrong. I thought he was a happy, engaged member of the team. Found out a few weeks later that he was a recovering alcoholic. And I didn't have to. No one asked me to. No one mentioned it. It wasn't a problem. But I made sure that the next time I organized an event with several hundred people that he was going to be volunteering at, that we had a non-alcoholic beer option, that we had sparkling water right next to the champagne when it came time to do the toasts. And since I did that, he came up to me, and a couple of other people that I didn't know who were recovering alcoholics came up to me and just expressed their thanks, said how they felt so touched by it. And it made those people so much more engaged in what we were doing, so much more happier to be there. It strengthened the relationship. It strengthened our community. They really could show up and be themselves authentically and not have to feel awkward or not even have to hide any part of themselves. So even if there's not a problem, keep a lookout for ways you can foster well-being, right? Are members of your team differently abled? Do they have children at home? Are they taking care of an aging parent, which is something my family is dealing with? How can you foster well-being of every member of your team, create a diverse set of activities? So I'm going to pause there. Max, any stories on any of these three topics that you wanted to share?
I think for a lot of the BRGs, we really try to do a good job trying to accommodate the needs of all of our members, right? Regarding, for example, when we plan for events or activities, we try to avoid Friday night just in case people have plans for Friday night with their family and friends, and we try to set the time not too late in the day. And overall, I think of all the 3 points that Heath, you presented just now, I think empathy is the one that I think I can relate to the most. I think BRGs is part of the firm or business that we are in, but at the same time, we're promoting diversity, and we're doing something good here. So sometimes we kind of pay too much attention to the budget, to the social impact of our events, and really do not or fail to take into consideration all the aspects of all the, how people feel and how people would react to the arrangement of these kind of events. So if we can just practice a little bit more empathy and ask around, ask people about their opinions on our social events, on our activities, and get their feedback and take them into consideration for our next event. Just a little step like that could make a big difference. I mean, just based on our live discussion back in October, so we all got evaluated. We all got feedback from our live audience back in October. And I realized, although we are talking about inclusion within the BRGs, I personally made some mistakes during our workshop that might have made the live audience of about 100 people felt excluded. Maybe it's the definition of the choice of words or the way I present it. So everybody is learning. And with that willingness to learn, to listen, open to different ideas and opinions, I think all of our BRGs and all of us people can do a better job promoting diversity within our BRGs.
Excellent, Max. Yeah. So just to recap, we said that personal empathy is paramount, right? It's key to everything when it comes to inclusion. You've got to be empathetic. You've got to relate to the people that you're interacting with. And then the three frameworks we presented were leveraging unique strengths, encouraging authenticity, especially among the leaders, and fostering well-being. So I'd like to just open it up for some feedback from the audience. Maybe we can chit-chat about a couple of the stories or comments that you share, and then I'll kind of close it out and bring us home. What are we hearing from the group?
We're getting some great feedback here on really liking the notion of capitalizing on the strengths and interests of individual members. And there's a question around that in terms of how you would go about advancing that to leadership so that you can present that as a structure for the team.
Yeah, I think one framework that we use is there's a series of just what we call strength cards, but there's a bajillion things online too. And sometimes when I'm forming a new team, or maybe when you have a new ERG leadership team or a first meeting, it's a fun activity, a fun icebreaker just to have people kind of identify their strengths. One way to do it is to pick 50 strengths and give people 2 minutes to pick their top 5 strengths. That seems to work well. And then they take those 5 strengths and they kind of transfer those into a strength statement. I feel strong when I'm on a team, when I'm able to speak publicly and really engage with large groups and lead calls or something like that. Or I'm most strengthened when sitting in the background, when formatting Excel, sending communications, and balancing the budget. And just have an honest conversation about what people want to do in the ERG, right? And then use that as a starting point for assigning roles on choosing the activities the ERG is going to do, and even the role that an ERG president or vice chair or treasurer might play, right, or secretary. I think sometimes we're too tied up, I know some ERGs at Deloitte are guilty of this, into the structure and the quote-unquote leadership, and not necessarily creating an ERG that is actually a productive use of everyone's time that's going to fulfill them.
Great. Sort of along with that, a great comment here saying that it's a possible leadership development opportunity, that perhaps if I spend my day job doing communications, that I might want to do something in Excel and sort of go outside of my box within that realm. So also some opportunities with regard to that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and one common pitfall, I think this came up in October too, is do not make anything or hardly anything in your ERG mandatory, right? Like every ERG member must go sit at this booth at the fair or at the, the Pride Walk or something, right? Oh, that's just a recipe for disaster, right? For a million different reasons. Those people might have other family obligations. They might not enjoy chatting with people. They might be really introverted. So I think the flip side of that is not just assigning tasks, but try to not make anything cookie cutter.
Great point with that. Well, we're coming right up about at time. We have a few more questions coming in. If you do have questions, please feel free to chat those in the box. But before we move on, I would like to open it up to both Max and Heath if you have any closing comments.
Sure, Max, you go first, then I'll close it out.
Sure. Thank you again, everybody, for dialing in today. I know you're dialed in for different reasons, and we have your different expectations for this webinar, and I hope that we were able to answer your questions. As I said, it is highly interactive, and I really appreciate all the people who shared their thoughts along the way. If you would like to carry this conversation along, you can find both of us on LinkedIn, and we can carry the conversation there. And I have been reading your comments here and questions in the chat area, chat field. I'm afraid we cannot get to every single one of them, but I do see a lot of people who feel, the same way that we feel, or even stronger, that when they felt excluded from their BRGs. I just want you to know that we're all here together, and together we can make it a better ERG, BRG, a better environment for us all. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Yeah, and I'd really challenge everyone on the call to just not think about these things personally, about empathy, fostering well-being, leveraging unique strengths, and encouraging authenticity. Don't just think about it in terms of yourself. Think about how you can bake it into your ERG processes, right? Think about how when you're writing that ERG charter, when you're electing your leadership, try to think back to these frameworks and see how you can institutionalize them and take them just beyond your personal actions. And I'll close with a story. 4 years ago, my boss asked me to attend Out and Equal in San Francisco, and I told him no. I told him that I was not a professional gay and that I just preferred just to stay at my office and not go. He told me, he kept persisting just gently, that it would be a great opportunity for me, and I finally succumbed and I went. I was at Out and Equal the first day, and there was a Deloitte breakout, and our deputy CEO was attending. She was speaking at Out and Equal that year. And in just a Deloitte session, she was taking questions from us Deloitte employees, and she said something that really stuck with me and really shook me. She said, if our clients are not comfortable with our trans consultants, we're not comfortable having them as clients. And that was a wake-up call for me that who am I, as just, a gay dude, to not be my authentic self at work? If I had trans colleagues that were being their authentic selves every day at work with our clients, and some at some personal sacrifice. And our deputy CEO's comments really, and her authenticity and her saying that caused me to be more authentic. And like I said, that authenticity is contagious. I think her comments and her empathy, her comments, on the surface to empathize with our trans consultants also impacted me. And it started a kind of a change in my thinking that allowed me to be more confident at work, to be more authentic at work, to be signing up for more leadership positions. And I've become a lot happier at work over the last few years. Felt like I can really be myself. And it all came out of someone, a senior leader in our company, being vulnerable, sharing, being authentic. And then, fast forward 3 years later, I'm presenting a workshop at Out and Equal. So I tell people that the evolution is complete. But that only happened because my leaders were authentic, right? And we're trying to empathize. And so that, in return, is what I'm trying to do, hopefully somewhat successfully with all of you on the phone, is encourage you to be authentic. So I think that's it. Over to you, Daniel and Isabel.
Great. Well, Max and Heath, thank you both so much for your input and your insight. Thank you for presenting this workshop at Summit and then presenting it once again for our virtual audience. We really want to thank each and every one of you who has dialed into the call today. Once again, this call will be recorded and available as a digital archive on our website, www.outandequal.org. So we encourage you to go ahead and share that with all of your team. Of course, we would love for each and every one of you to join us at the 2017 Out and Equal Workplace Summit, October 9th through 12th in Philadelphia. There will be a brief survey at the end of the call, and your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to fill that out. Once again, thank you all for joining us today, and have a fantastic rest of your day.